Hey, living environment, life science, biology fans from across the globe. It's Hockey Jersey Thursday. Yeah, we're going to thrash it up this Thursday. And of course, we just started studying cells, the basic unit of life, cells. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about development of what was called the cell theory. All right, so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. How do people start thinking about cells and how cells work?
All right. Hey now. Mr. Kovacs class. It's Mr. Kovacs class. You might learn a ton. It's Mr. Kovacs class.
It's interesting too.
It's Mr. Kovacs class. And he's super cool. It's Mr. Kovacs class.
So today we're going to dive into this, what's called the cell theory. Now, in science, the word theory is different than in the vernacular. When, like for example, the theory of relativity or the theory of gravity, that means that when something's a theory, that means it's true scientifically. Okay, so cell theory is basically the understanding of how cells work, and it's really simple. It started back with the invention of microscopes. The man named Robert Hooke, right? And Robert Hooke used this very simple microscope. It had two lenses. He was able to put stuff on a stage and look at specimens, and he used light to do that. And what he looked at were pieces of cork, which were the dead remains of some plant tissue. And he found these little boxes in the cork, or what we know as cells. He called them cells. And he famously published a book called Micrographia, where he put a lot of drawings that he made of things he looked at under his microscope. Now I mention this because when you use your microscope, you're gonna have to start get good at drawing what you see. Although it's a little bit easier now because we have cameras built into our phones that we might be able to take pictures of what we can see. Right, and that might make our life a lot easier. Right, so Robert Hooke kind of got the ball rolling with the cell theory. That was in the mid-1600s. He was a contemporary of Isaac Newton and a pretty famous scientist in his own right. But his legacy now is that he named cells cells. Around the same time, there's a guy named Anton van Leeuwenhoek. And he's interesting for us because he was the first person to observe living cells that were living. And he used his microscope to look at all kinds of things. Pond water, stream water, he looked at hair, he looked at clothing, he looked at the inside of people's mouths, he scraped people's teeth, he even looked at sperm cells, right? And he looked at all kinds of stuff. And yeah, he was the first to describe living microscopic organisms, and he drew pictures of them. And get the theme here about drawing pictures. Right, there's Anton van Leeuwenhoek with his microscope, and he was probably the first person to ever see bacteria, which he drew images of. He saw small protists, right, things we recognize now as like paramecium and diatoms and things like that. He noticed them, right? He was the first guy to notice them. He saw small microscopic animals like little larvae of insects and rotifers and worms and microscopic things. And it must have been mind-blowing to see all that stuff for the first time. He even looked at sperm cells, right? He was the first person to see and describe sperm cells as being, we know them now as the genetic agents, right? That carry genes in the head of a sperm cell looking for eggs. And it was about 150 years later when a guy named Matthias Schleiden came up with what we call the cell theory. Using microscopes, he was a botanist and studied plants. And he found that no matter what plants he looked at, whether they were aquatic plants, land plants, didn't matter, they were all made of cells. So he came up with this theory, the cell theory, the first step of that. All plants are made of cells. And he had a partner, a contemporary, a guy named Theodor Schwann, And Theodore Schwann was a zoologist. He studied animals, and along with his friend, they used Sliden and Swan used microscopes, and he noticed that animals were divided into subunits we call cells. So the beginning of the cell theory was that all living things are made up of cells. Okay? And then not too far after, a man named Rudolf Virchow, or Virchow you could call him, he noticed that cells only seem to come from pre-existing cells. They go through cell division. He was the first person to describe division of cells to make brand new cells. So that became part of the cell theory, is that all cells must come from other cells. So now we have it distilled down to like three. Here's Virchow's drawings. Again, drawings of cells going through division. Boiled down to three components, all right? Three tenets, if you will. Number one, all living things are made of cells. Number two, cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things. And three, all cells are produced from pre-existing cells. So that's the cell theory. Live it, love it, know it, learn it, live it, love it, know it. In class, we're gonna spend time with the cell theory. You're gonna read a little article about cell theory. Your ed puzzle today is about the kind of wacky stuff that went on behind the scenes of the men that determined the cell theory. And then you get a good grasp, but the take home is cells are the basic unit of life on Earth. To be alive, you have to be made of at least one cell. All right, so let's do class today on this Hockey Jersey Thursday.